Hey, what's up? It's Jake, and we're going to go over adopting infrastructure as code in your team. So, a lot of times teams manage things by hand, or they might use fancy tools and whatnot, and it requires a lot of change. You got to convince people of things, you got to change things, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of that's culture too. So, the three areas we want to focus on for adoption is really going to be convincing your boss, working incrementally, and then giving people just time to let things settle in, soak in, and just kind of learn the new tools. So the first thing is convincing your boss. So I've been this boss, and I know I've probably said some of the things that people absolutely abhor. As a developer now, I kind of go, I cringe a little bit at that thought. But there's some validity to this thing. So I can tell you that I've been on both sides of this issue in this conversation. And so I'll try to give you context from both sides. So the first one is a skills gap. Um, Not everybody that looks at infrastructure as code sees the value the way you want them to see it. And that's because there's a lot of costs associated with it you might not think about. The skills gap is one of them. It takes a lot of time to write all this code, to test all this code, to implement it, to replace current operational procedures with new operational automated procedures. And while, yes, that will save time in the long run, there are trade offs. And one of those things is a skills gap. So some people are comfortable coding all day, some people are not. And if you try to change everybody's workflow, some people are going to pick it up faster than others. And the amount of time it takes them to pick that up, there may be existing projects that kind of need more attention, whether that's figuring out how whatever the outage was from last week and writing an RCA or doing whatever. So there's a little bit of an opportunity cost there. Is the opportunity to automate this, does that cost outweigh the cost of doing nothing and leaving some of those other things the way they've always been done, but getting another code release out or doing a patch, does that directly relate to dollars? Sometimes the cost we're talking about isn't money, it's investment in belief in you and belief in the way that the culture needs to change. So sometimes opportunity cost really means if I forego implementing infrastructure as code today to help somebody solve a problem, does me helping them solve a problem invest in me and my idea to implement infrastructure as code so that it will be bought into later down the road? And that really comes down to how you sell it, right? So when you're selling a tool and you're talking about infrastructure as code specifically, you don't want to tell people like Terraform is open source. When you're talking about the skills gap, you could tell your boss, hey, I know a way to get people that use a tool in a very large community, in a large open source community, that makes it easier for us to hire people that know how to manage these tools instead of just saying it's open source, it's free or whatever. So a lot of times it's not a feature that you want to sell, it's the benefit that you want to sell, right? So if you go back and look at your tickets and you had 100 tickets and 50 of them were because of some manual change to a Linux server because some ops person was manually SSHing into something, running a couple commands, and then calling it a day and closing the ticket. And you add up all that time, and you can go to your boss and say, "Hey, what if I told you I figured out a way to reduce our ticket queue by 50%?" That would give them, you know, a little more interest. Definitely pique their interest. And when they ask you how, say, "Well, it looks like half of these tickets, came from this type of problem, and I know of a way we can use a tool to actually solve that problem to reduce our ticket load, which will give us more time. And this is how much time it would save us, and this is how much uptime we would get in return if, in fact, any of those tickets resulted in downtime." So new tools, they can always kind of come with a little reluctance, not just with management, with other developers, ops people, whatnot. They like to do what they know. They're sick of learning new stuff, whatever the case may be, and they have to invest a lot of time into it. And they might not want to do that. It might even mean learning a new language or some people think YAML is a language that they have to learn. It's a big inconvenience, and even though it's not, right? Um, so it's just a total change in mindset. If you have people that are used to making things changes directly, moving to IaC is a huge change. You're managing things indirectly with templating and code versus directly managing it, and there's a lot of trust there. You have to have trust in the tool, and when people see what the tool can do, they may be scared that Terraform's too heavy-handed, and you have to teach them about tests, and you have to teach them about Sentinel policies, and you have to teach them, like all these things. 'Cause any tool can be heavy-handed if you don't configure it correctly, or I shouldn't say correctly, around the constraints that you're worried about. So I would definitely work on focusing on the problems that you have and try to address the problems with solutions rather than regurgitating features about, oh, it's a declarative infrastructure. Well, who cares? Nobody really cares. That's not why people buy off on stuff. So yeah, that's definitely kind of my take on convincing your boss or even the people around you. So the second part's working incrementally. You have to go slow. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's what they used to say in the Marine Corps when I was in. Um, so think about doing a huge migration project. You're going to break that up into smaller steps, and nothing is really delivered, and nobody's cheering until the last step is done. And being the DevOps world is kind of similar because every little piece of progress you make, it's not really going to be celebrated until the very end. So what the good thing is, I think, is just take a problem, break it up into smaller pieces, get those into modules, get it tested, get it iterated, everything you can. And once you get to the end, you have a little place to celebrate and you have something to do. But you have to go through these tiny steps in order to get any sort of progress. And it'll also help with your code because your code's going to be very modular and you won't have to refactor everything into smaller pieces because you tried to take on too much. You made this giant monolith thing. It'll make your code faster and easier to test, easier to do end to end, easier to integrate, easier to function, stuff like that. So the last part's giving people time to learn. These things take time, right? So um, somebody, again, like I said, somebody might be really passionate about this and be like, oh, I've used this before, it's great, we should use it. Or they might say, oh, I've heard about this before, I really want to learn it. Or one thing I really hear a lot with DevOps people and non-DevOps people alike is, I want to add this to my resume, we should start using this so I can say that I've used this in production. Those are all fine ways to motivate somebody, but not everybody's like that, right? Like if somebody's happy and productive, then they're going to keep doing what they're doing. If the rest of the team doesn't get on board and adopts Terraform, then it's going to be hard to go against. It's kind of like apathy, but it's really just kind of a state of content. I'm content with the way things are. I'm indifferent and see no reason to change my circumstances. Well, eventually you'll get an outage and everybody won't be unhappy or everybody won't be happy anymore. And these are the kinds of things you don't rub it in their face, but they're the kind of things you document, you track of how many things happened that didn't have to happen, that kind of stuff. As a result of manual changes that people inevitably are going to take, part of that learning curve is just going to be running Terraform plans and Terraform refreshes and stuff and seeing like, what did people change? And then going to those people and be like, okay, what were you changing? And why did you change it? And they'll be like, oh, I had this ticket and we had to do this and we had to do that. And it's just going through with a team and saying, okay, you did the right thing to fix it. Here's how we would do it in code because we want to get to that indirect solution and not the direct solution. Again, it's huge culture change. It's a mindset change, but it does take time, and you can't get mad at people. You just have to like be patient and give them a little leniency. And it could take months. It could take years. It depends on the people in the company, right? So when you have outages and stuff like that, and in the example I gave you, and then you have like a different person that's on call, and they have to deal with somebody else's mistake, then it might not be you explaining this. It might be somebody else who gets frustrated because someone makes manual change, which creates rifts in your team, and then you see morale start to go down. Like these things have a blast radius that can go pretty far. So something as simple as trying to automate your infrastructure as code so that you can have less outages can actually create a lot of problems, mostly cultural mindset type things, but also in your code because people aren't used to doing this yet. So again, just give them time and be patient. Start with something small, something that has less impact if something goes wrong, and then you can kind of grow from there. Again, kind of that incremental approach. So in a short amount of time, everybody will probably go back to doing everything the way that they were doing it before, and all of your code will be completely unusable. I myself spent 2 years at a company building stuff only for it to just not be used anymore. It's frustrating. It's really frustrating. You spend months or even years writing something. It's basically a total waste. You got to try to mitigate that by again just sticking with a routine and getting your management on board, sell your boss, make incremental changes, and give people time. If you don't do those three things, you will end back up at square one, and you probably won't be very happy with that. So um, if you want to try to help speed up the process, make sure it's well defined. Whether you're on a small team or a person just doing it, if you document what you're doing and you're consistent with it and you have a well-defined process, that's what people want to follow. The reason that people don't want to do infrastructure as code is because they already have a process and they're already using it. It's well defined. It's reliable. And so what you need to do is you need to give them another well-defined, reliable process. And eventually, with new people or old people that get on board, that's just the way things are. And that's how you do them. And you don't have a way that it always is because this is the way that it always is. So I guess all that to say, the shortcut is the long way. And if you want people to get on board, then just make sure it's well defined, well documented. As your company grows, your infrastructure's code usage will grow. You'll want to have a more systematic approach, a more repeatable approach. You'll start automating things more. And you'll notice that as things grow, and I was on one team that used this and the other team next to us didn't. And as our customer base grew, we had the same amount of work to do because we were writing the same scripts, but just deploying it to, a larger number of servers. And the other team was drowning because they were just trying to keep up with this linear growth of manual changes. So definitely a problem in our industry. There's no hard and fast solution, but just keep in mind if you stick with those three things, convincing your boss, work incrementally, and then just take time, let people learn, give them time to learn. You'll be way better off in the long run. So I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.